Over the years, what I've done was try to use and teach people about third-party risk and educate people with respect to third-party risk by using analogies. A common one that I've used is to review your vendors and take a look at them with the same cadence that an amusement park has when they're going to profile somebody who's going to ride the ride. And the importance of that is certainly from a risk perspective. Security risk, from a health risk, all of that has to be taken into consideration. You certainly wouldn't want a small child to go on to a high-risk coaster with a lot of twists, a lot of turns, a lot of loops. It's very fast. And there's reason why they have things like height requirements, weight requirements, and even medical requirements, particularly if you have neck or back injuries, things of that nature. Companies need to view their vendors along those same guidance. And what I mean by that is you can't have an immature vendor being exposed to critical processes or critical data if they cannot meet your own tolerance for risk, if they cannot meet those security and privacy standards that you have set within your organization. A great example of this would be if you go back and you take my example of having a child go onto this high-risk roller coaster. Think of that if that was a vendor that had a low security and privacy posture. Would you really want to expose them to millions or tens of millions of critical records with credit card information or protected health information or other type of sensitive data? I'm sure the answer is going to be no. And you do that based on your risk tolerance. Amusement parks have a risk tolerance. They know if something happens to that child, they can be hit. Obviously, you have the catastrophic loss of the child. You're going to have the parents obviously going through duress. You're going to have the amusement park being sued, the carnival ride operator. All of this comes into play. And it's the same with an organization that may outsource critical data, access and exposure to critical process to a vendor that doesn't live up to their expectation of good security controls. And by doing that, you really are putting yourself at risk. And if you're in a regulated environment, I can guarantee you that the regulators will look for these things and they will come down hard on you. So it's best that you're able to define your risk tolerance and be able to explain to your vendors that this is what is required if you're going to take on these types of work. I've always liked to follow the data because in this day and age, that's really what it's about. What are you giving the vendor to process? And if you're giving them something to process, you're either giving them intellectual property, you're giving them access to customer data, or you're giving them access your employee data. So you want to make sure that you have standards in place, tolerances, if you will, as to the exposure of that data. Do you know where it's going? It's very much in the same situation as if you're going to get ready to go out of town and you want to hand over the key to your neighbor to water your plants, let your dog out, take in the mail and things like that. Well, if you had a same vendor, if you've had the same, in this instance, of a neighbor that you've known for 20 years, and they had little kids and the kids have grown up and they already have access to your house through the key, did you ever sit back and say, wow, I've been watching your kids grow over the years, and now you start to realize the crowd that they hang with and the reputations that they have is a little bit outside of my risk tolerance. Should I change the lock? Should I take away the key? Should I just take the chance, or I'm too nice, I don't want to bother them? And then you find out when you come back from vacation that your house was trashed. So the point that I'm trying to drive there is you have to constantly evaluate who has exposure to your data, who has exposure to your house, who has exposure to your possessions, which is anything from your critical processes to your critical data. And so you have to constantly take that into view, and you have to make sure that they are in tolerance with what your risk posture is. I looked at 4 components. First is proper scoping. I'll follow that with due diligence. Then I'll touch on just having dialogue with them and having an understand with respect to their policies and procedures. If we start with proper scoping, the thing you need to do is make sure you have an understanding of what they're going to be doing with your data. And so many organizations tend to just hand them a questionnaire and say, go fill this out. Well, the problem that you deal with that is what's been known in the industry as vendor fatigue or assessment fatigue. You get a vendor going, you're asking me to answer all these questions, and yet this is all I'm doing for you. And that looks bad for you as an outsourcer, because you might have an auditor or a regulator coming in that's now going through your detailed analysis, and 80% of the questions that you asked them came back as no or not applicable. And now you're saying, oh yeah, we're fine to use them. Good luck trying to explain that to a regulator or to an internal auditor or even an external auditor for that matter. So you want to make sure that you scope it perfectly. Here's a good example. Something that I've done for years is I would ask people, do you assess your custodial staff in the office? When I would ask this question 7-8 years ago, I'd be lucky if 10% of the hands would go up in the room. Now it's closer to 80-90%. Some people say, well, why would you do that? And I would often say, think of what they're exposed to. Do you think they're just coming in, they're emptying out your trash cans, they're sweeping the floors, they're walking around? Obviously, you have things on your desk. You walk into a conference room, remember the whiteboards that say do not erase? There's your marketing strategy. There's your whole entire network schematic. There's all your subnets to your network. All it takes is a click and to put this out to the highest bidder for somebody out there. So you might not turn around and ask them questions like, do you have a business continuity plan? Well, somebody calls off sick, we get somebody else. Do you have an information security plan? Why would you ask me these questions? So that's what I'm talking about, scoping this properly, particularly for a vendor like that, who you know is going to be exposed to your data. The thing that you got to realize is ask them the questions that pertain to what they're going to be doing to your data. Human resources. Do they do background checks on these individuals? Do they have criminal records? Do you allow them to walk around with a typical phone that has a camera on it that can take those pictures? If they want to listen to music, maybe you have to say, you can do that, but you must show it that you're using a small iPod or some other type of portable music device. It can't be something with a camera. It's just scoping it right helps to align. This is additionally the value add that you're bringing to the organization by actually scoping this, and you're helping the business unit transact faster with that vendor. You've got to start looking at the vendor as a business partner, and that's truly what they are. That's the value add you bring to the organization. With respect to due diligence, tying that into the same way, making sure that you understand what you're going to be comfortable with when those questionnaires come back, with the evidence and the due diligence that comes back to you. Do they meet your tolerance? Are there anything outstanding that you might want to take a look at and go, you know what, we might have to go further on this. I'm not in agreement with this. Follow-up questions, things of that nature. You get that by having a dialogue. Dialogue with the vendor, dialogue with the business unit. Make sure that you understand fully what the vendor is going to be doing for you. Oftentimes the business unit may change and add some other things to the scope. Now you're dealing with scope creep. So you want to make sure you're in alignment with what the statement of work is. And lastly, policy. You got to make sure that things are documented. Even on your side, you got to make sure that you have documented exactly what and how you're going to do things from a third-party risk assessment and analysis perspective. What they're able to do by following those steps is they're able to have the risk tolerance setting for that particular scope of work. And that scope of work can be transferable to other like companies that are dealing with that scope of work. So if you sit there and say, in this instance with the custodial staff, this is what you're going to execute for this particular building, for this particular location, for this particular city, and you could transfer that over to other locations. This is what we require for any custodial staff that's going to be at any of our facilities. Whether it's custodial staff, whether it's a cloud provider, whether it's somebody that's going to be shredding your documentation, by having these defined, customized scopes of work is going to save not just you, but your vendor a whole lot of time, and it's going to help solidify and strengthen that vendor organizational relationship.